The Drieta, or to put it another way, the Sword of Dretha, is a great breed of warriors. Each generation has produced members with great physical strength and unknown abilities. Their character and will to help those in need has managed to give great support to the entire empire. For their efforts, they were awarded the title of Imperial Sword. It turns out that the emperor himself appointed them. The emperor also gave them a sacred sword called Garcian. This weapon was filled with the power of a god. It so happened that the person who was lucky enough to become its owner was the only daughter of their family. Her name was Erica Drieta, or to put it another way, Drieta's treasure. Right now, this girl is engaged in farming, and so she did a little bit, and then she got up and said that at last she was finished. She added that now she would have a great harvest. The girl turned the sword into a hoe. After all, she thought that it would be much more convenient for her. After these terrible actions, it was noticed to her how, after all, she could desecrate the gift of God in such a way. She said enough of these words out of her. That's how the days went by on her farm. It might sound strange, but unfortunately for her parents, she had no time at all to learn fencing. After all, now every free minute the protagonist devotes to growing rice. The girl born into the greatest family and enjoyed all the riches and luxurious life. But all this was only until recently. In her world, the heroine was an entrepreneur, and her business was related to the cultivation of rice. So she just recently remembered suddenly her old life, and remembered her past life. The girl realized that she had fallen into a novel called The Noble Countess. According to the plot, Erica in the body she got into is the villain in the novel. When the girl remembered this, it thought about what happened and whether she is in the case of the villain. The heroine knew that she is a minor character who tries in every way to ruin the life of the main character. And also in the end, she ends up having him executed altogether, in full view of everyone. She thought that, after all, her fate is not the best at the moment. At first, the girl blamed everything on God, but then she realized something. After all, she realized that the joint life with her parents, aristocrats who loved her very much, is not so bad. And then there was the power of Drieta flowing through her veins. Starting is perfect for realizing her dream. Either way, she would stay away from the protagonist and the main character. And that's why she thought she wouldn't be executed then. After all, the girl will try to change her fate and realize her dream by then. It was because she dreamed of something that she had dreamed of for a very long time. The protagonist remembered that she had a half-brother, and besides the future head of the family, he was also the archmage of Rol Dreith. This man has healing powers and is able to control all divine power. The next person, however, is the heir of the Duke of Shanravis. And next comes the protagonist of this piece. His name was Roxelin Draco, and he was the crown prince of the Ryth Empire. Also, the girl remembered that in the novel, there is a storyline of one hero who went mad with love and was going to destroy the world. More precisely, he was a lord, a demon, and his name was Daon Behemoth. The very last character was the protagonist of the novel, the true owner of the Holy Ball. She was a saint, and her name was Pandora Valentina. It was because of all these characters that the girl's everyday life went to hell. The heroine thought, why only everything is so unfair? After all that she wants in this world to be an ordinary farmer. After a while, the girl saw that she was on her own farm. After looking around, she saw shining golden rice. Immediately, she realized that this was the life of a successful farmer. She realized that she was just that, a successful farmer. But suddenly, she woke up in her home. When she woke up, she immediately realized that it was a dream. When the girl came to herself, and then everything became even stranger at her, the heroine walked along the corridors of the estate, at which she lived, and thought that for the first time in a long time, she had a dream. The name of the main character was Erica Dreet. The girl had memories from her past life, and now she was a would-be villain. Past life, she was completely crazy about farming. All of this was thanks to her Vernier parents. It was from a young age that the girl just happened to grow up on a farm. It also happened that she dreamed of becoming a farmer, and even dropped out of school because of this. As soon as she took up farming in just 5 years, she made their farm a world leader in rice production. As a consequence, she gained the respect and envy of many people. It was her perfect life and the peak of her farming career. Well, literally, after a while, a terrible thing happened. Very out of the ordinary day, and a woman was returning home while crossing the road. Suddenly, she turned sideways and saw a truck coming. In the next instant, it hit the girl to death. After a certain amount of time, the girl found herself in this affair. Suddenly, a memory came to her when she was living an ordinary life of a girl. She remembered everything about her life and this madness that had happened to her. At that very moment when she suddenly remembered her past life, then a wave of panic came over her. I knew parents at that moment were shocked at what was happening to the girl. The world that the girl had lived in until now was actually the world from a novel. It was the novel that the protagonist read just before her death. It turns out that she was reincarnated in one of the characters of the novel. This work was called The Noble Countess. The plot of the novel was prohibitively simple. The main character was a woman who possessed the divine powers of Pandora. And also to all this, there appear crazy heroes who fell in love with Pandora. That's exactly how some kind of love affair came about. It just so happens that in the original story, a villain appears in pursuit of Pandora. Well, that's exactly her case, and reborn heroine. The villain was called Erica Drita. Erica was raised in an aristocratic family, so she was called the Treasure Drita. She was characterized by her bad temper and her immense strength. Also bullied many people, including the main character Pandora herself. Because of this, Erica's evil deeds only got worse over the years. Eventually, even her family turned their backs on her. She lost everyone who was on her side, and eventually she is executed for the sins she committed. The girl was just thinking back on the whole story and wondering why all of this was so. After all, it turns out that in the end, she will still die in this story. The new father and mother of the main character were shocked at what was happening to the girl. The woman saw this and asked if she was okay. The girl looked at her mom, pondered that, if you think about it in the original, the parents of this girl were to the end on her side and protected. It turns out her to the last. Also, the heroine realized that up to now, they also raised her with all their love. Seeing the faces of her parents, the girl wondered if she was in big trouble. Tears appeared on her face and she also blushed very much. At the same time, she immediately thanked her parents for the care that you raised her. She also said that she would be a good daughter in the future. Her parents immediately asked Erica what was hurting her and why she was blushing all red at this time. All this happened just a few days ago. The girl was sitting in her room again and thinking about how to avoid her death. After much thought, she came to the conclusion that at this age, Erica had not yet committed any of her evil deeds. That's why she has a chance now, and to change her future. It turns out that right now, Pandora has not yet met the protagonist, and she will not bother the protagonist and heroine. That's why she doesn't get executed. She also remembered all the main characters in this novel and thought that she should not meet them in any case. Looking out the window, the girl thought that it was possible to go crazy, because I should still come up with some plan. Suddenly looked at the street, she noticed there was green grass and a tree growing nearby. At that, she immediately smiled and thought that she had an idea after all. After all, it turns out, she would be able to succeed in farming, just like in her previous life. The girl firmly decided that, at least in this life, she should live to old age. But in the whole remembered that she had a little problem. At that she thought whether she should go to that very man. She remembered that man who was at one with her in the novel. This person was another main character. After a while, the girl went in a carriage to some place. Suddenly, the coachman announced to the lady that they had finally arrived, and she started to get out. Here she got out of the carriage, it immediately froze in her gaze, looking at that very place. She realized that they had arrived at the magic tower. This very place was quite large and with quite beautiful architecture. It was the Imperial Research Institute, which was a magic tower. The girl got inside and thought that this was not the kind of place that anyone could come to. But she was the one who could enter this place because of their family's crest. Right now, the girl was sitting outside one of the rooms and sipping delicious tea. Because of that, she was glad that she was contentedly savoring it. Suddenly, the girl remembered that she had brought here for a special purpose. At that, it immediately dawned on her whether the person she had come to see would come. After a moment, the girl set down her tea and heard herself being addressed by her full name, Erica Drita. The girl smiled sweetly and thought she had come after all. It was that fellow older brother. He, upon entering the room, wondered what she was even here for. This man's name was Roel Drita. Looking into his eyes, the protagonist realized that he had no tenderness and a very cold look. This man hates her so much and is her only older brother. In fact, it turns out that he just happens to play the main male role in this novel. Duchess Drita, after her marriage, was unable to have children for a long time. Roel was adopted, but as soon as he got used to family life, they had a daughter. It was this daughter that was the main character. After that, the situation of the boys in the duchy rather badly deteriorated. The girl constantly showered her brother with attention and took away all the good things from him. Erica was in force, took advantage of his status. After all, he was not the native son of the Dreet family. So here was Erica, despite her parents' love, belonged more to the Driet family. Creating a rift between the Duke, Duchess, and Roel, the girl banished her older brother to the Magic Tower. It was as a result of this that the boy hated his little sister so much that he was ready to burn her alive. Having harbored such a strong hatred in the original, he completely disowned her. At the very moment of the execution of the main villain, Roel was also present. It was on that very day that he smiled so genuinely for the first time, looking at everything. All this because Erica had taken away his greatest asset, which was his family. It was because of all of this that this guy had such hatred for her. After a brief moment of thought, the girl heard her older brother address her. He inquired as to what had brought her here after all. The girl thought that, given the real story, it was natural for him to be so angry at the sight of her. The girl hesitated to answer at first. At the same time, she thought that it was scary when reality confronted such a person, and immediately thought about how to still catch eye contact with him. Suddenly, the heroine rose to her feet and stated that she had come to visit her brother, noticing all of this because they are family. She also thought that she shouldn't be afraid of Roel, since he is still a child. Also thought that she will definitely need this guy to keep us alive in the future. Hearing these words, her interlocutor immediately smiled strangely. Nearby asked if they were family after all, immediately threw an evil look and asked, why would they be a family? At that, the two that he just could not believe his ears that it was the girl who said those words. The main character heard those words and was shocked. She panicked a lot and thought about what she should do. After all, the atmosphere between them is heating up even worse. If it continued like this, Roel would deal with her before she was even executed. Thought that she should act now then and turn to marriage. After doing so, noticed that she had something she needed to tell him. While doing so, thought that she needed to take that very first step. Here, by this very first step, the girl meant to sit on his lap. Immediately she did so and told her brother that she was wrong, wondering if he saw the whole thing, for she even overstepped her pride. Also further continued to apologize to him and stated that she was sincerely doing so, while asking him to just forgive her for everything. She also thought that her pride was not so important now because life was more precious. It also occurred to her that perhaps the one would not forgive her, but she would still try to make it all right. In doing so, she promised that things would be very different from now on. At that, she thought to herself, just begging him to save her. Suddenly, her older brother remarked to her that he had had enough of all this. Also stated that he was not her real brother anyway. The girl immediately wanted to say something to him, but the guy interrupted her. Well, in the next instant, he used his magic to lift the girl up, and she immediately rose to her feet. The heroine was shocked and thought, is it really magic? Then the interlocutor remarked to her not to speak, and that she did not think that the guy does not want to hear it all anymore. After that, he reached out his hand to the girl and said that in any case, nothing could change. And at the same time, he kicked the girl out of the very room they were in. Sometime after all the events, the heroine was in her room. After that time, she went several times to her older brother, but he did not come out to her. The heroine was lying in her room and noticed that they probably won't be able to have any more contact with him. After all, After so much effort, nothing worked. Now it turns out that he just has no choice but to keep apologizing until Roel forgives her. She realized that according to the original novel, Roel really wants to kill Erica. After she seriously started hitting on the main character Pandora, realized that I should be a lot more careful from now on, and also thought about what to do with her older brother now. For a few minutes, she lay there thinking about what to do. At the same time, she remembered the same vision and her past life of rice cultivation. Immediately getting up, she thought that everything was right and she should take up farming. After all, compared to her previous life where she started from the bottom, this life is very different from hers. After all, she is a lady duke in this world. And from that, it turns out that she has an entire golden spoon in her mouth. As a consequence, she noticed that this is all and will be the beginning for her noble farm life. After a while, the protagonist went to look out the window. There she looked at the area around her. While doing so, she thought that there was flat land everywhere and a perfect environment to grow anything. She then exhaled deeply and declared that it was just a waste of time. After all, so much good is just wasted. Looking at all this great expired outside the window, she cannot help but think about all this. After all, in her past life, she had worked hard at growing rice. Looking as they grew quickly, her soul became calm and very happy. She had always thought there would be a fine harvest that year. Now she was disappointed that all that effort had simply been in vain. Suddenly, she smiled and wondered if she could start doing all this in her new world after all. As long as she didn't give up, her desire would never go away. After that, she ran downstairs and thought that she would just have to try again then. After all, she will try to be very successful in growing rice. The moment the heroine ran downstairs from her room, she immediately stopped when she saw something. Turning her head to the side, she saw that there was some kind of huge sword on a stand. Immediately, the girl wondered what kind of sword it was. After a while, the girl did get away from there and bathed in the bed. Suddenly, the mistress was approached by the gardener of Dreith. He inquired if he could find out what she was doing here. The girl was surprised at such a question, and then hesitated to answer. After a moment, she smiled and stated that she was plowing a field. The gardener wondered in surprise what else it meant, plowing a field. Immediately thereafter, he would be curious as to why she was doing all this. The heroine heard this question and thought, "I'm just full of energy right now." That said, she doesn't even know what to say to this man's question. After a moment, she raised her hand and stated that this is her hobby. She added that it was a very popular hobby in their time. The man inquired if farming as a hobby was right for her. She, smiling, stated that it was exactly that. She asked if the man could get her some seedlings and seeds. The man remarked that it would definitely be difficult, but he added that if she needed it badly, he would be able to help her with it all. Still added that she is such a little girl and doing such a hard job at that. The protagonist proudly and smilingly stated that she was fine. She has a very strong body after all. Gardner noted that the problem is that she could get hurt, or even worse, get sick with anything while working. He also added that rumors spread very quickly in the duchy. At this time, the girl stood in front of him, and behind her was the very sword that was recently in the manor. After hearing the words of the interlocutor, the girl stated that her mom and dad knew how to exaggerate greatly. After all, honestly speaking, is she so weak and helpless in reality? That I replied that we still have too young for such hard work. After all, she is a fragile flower, which has not even blossomed yet. The protagonist immediately visualized these words in her head. The man went on to say that, after all, fieldwork is not for a lady like her. The girl smiled at him and immediately thought whether he doubted her much like that. At that, she looked at him and thought that this gardener's physique was perfect for planting rice. After her musings, the girl smiled and wondered if he really cared about her that much. Also still remarked that she would work for a little while and still go back to her place. The man from such strange words exhaled deeply. At that, he noticed to the lady that she had changed quite a bit lately. The girl made a surprised look and then turned to Felix and said that he should not worry. It was thanks to him that their garden was much more beautiful than it had been before. Such words of the girl a little even embarrassed the man. And then he said that it was his job after all. The girl immediately thought that taking care of plants was not such a simple job. After a while, she turned to Felix and asked him to lean over to her. He, in turn, said that he would do so and complied. The girl took her headdress in the form of a straw hat and handed it to the boy, putting it on his head. At the same time, the girl noticed that from this day, the hat is at his disposal. It turns out that he will use it for his work. The gardener was very much embarrassed by this and immediately inquired with surprise how he could take it after all. But the girl smiled at him again and said that it was all right and let him just take her. And that was the way he would help the girl with farming. The man didn't particularly like it, but he immediately stated that he would do just that. After that, they crossed their implements for work. The man had a pair of garden shears in his hands, and the girl had a white sword in her hands. The protagonist thought everything was perfect. Her operation to become her assistant was successfully completed. Felix literally sat and looked at the girl's weapon for a few seconds, and then froze. He immediately wondered if what he had just seen was what he had just thought of. Suddenly, with a packed face, he asked the lady what he was wielding. Immediately, he jumped to his feet and wondered if it was a relic of the Drake family. After all, it turns out that this is the very same holy sword Garcian. The girl immediately asked what other Garcian. After that, she began to think about the plot of the novel she was reading. Immediately, she remembered that the noble duchesses had the holy sword Garcian. This sword has a hidden power. After all, this sword chooses its own master. If we remember the very plot of the novel, if a man with a noble heart uses the sword, he also transfers the power to the chosen person. It turns out that this ball was used by the main character in the novel, and the girl remembered that this is what she read from in the original story. Then, the protagonist hit on the sword behind her back and said that, of course not. At that, she wondered if the man really thought she would have brought it right here. She also remembered that she had just looked at it then, and the thing had seemed very beautiful to her. So she just grabbed it then and went to the bed. The gardener exhaled deeply and said that it was a family heirloom after all. The girl pointed out to him that she did know that. The heroine knew that this heirloom played a very big role in the Dreith family. It is in this that she does not hide it, but on the contrary, shows it to everyone. The man stated to the lady that it was worth bringing it back, and the protagonist added to him that she would take it back as soon as she finished with the field. At the same time, she thought that actually, it was the best thing right now, as she was very curious if this weapon would react to her power. The gardener remarked that if the Duke did suddenly find out, it would be bad news. Immediately, they remembered the Lord and thought that it would be all real bad. After that, the girl declared that it turns out she has no other choice, spun the sword in her hands, and added that she would put it back where it belonged, also noting that she was now very sad and pitiful. It could have been her working tool after all. The man remarked that if that was the case, then he would just go on with his work. He then happily turned around and humming some songs ran off to work. The girl saw this and was even more pleased. After all, she thought, now she will not be disturbed by anyone. Then she twirled the sword in her hands again and thought that she could still use it secretly from everyone. She didn't know at the time that this holy sword would change her life in the future. Sometime after these events, the gardener came to the protagonist again. In his hands he brought some things, as turned to the lady and said that these are seeds and seedlings, which the girl recently asked him. The heroine, with a joyful smile on her face, immediately thanked Felix. The one, in turn, also favored, bent and declared that it was not worth thanking. After all, it was his work. He further added that he was glad that the girl was satisfied after all. At the same time, she went to the saplings to have a look. At this, she began to look at all the bags and all the seeds. Just then, she turned to Felix and inquired if he had found the rice seedlings. The man smiled at her and remarked that he somehow couldn't explain it to her. After all, he was wondering what she thought rice seedlings looked like in general. The protagonist of such a question was very surprised and wondered what he had just said. She was wondering if the one knew at all what rice was. The man immediately apologized and remarked that he was simply not an expert in all this. It just so happened that he didn't know what it looked like, so he asked other people. But even after he asked, then no one knew what a rice seedling looked like. The girl froze at such words and thought how come no one knew. After a short thought, she wondered how it was possible to not know about the existence of rice. Next, the girl remarked to her interlocutor that she understood everything. At the same time, she thought that perhaps people here have not found rice yet. The girl immediately went to the man and whispered in his ear to keep this, then all in secret, and in doing so, inquired if he was doing it. Also smiling sweetly, added that just because everyone would be worried about it. At that, the heroine thought that when she announced to all her teachers that she was taking a vacation, everyone sighed lightly. All of this is just because I'm passionate about farming should remain a secret. The gardener immediately told the lady with a smile that she could trust him and he would keep it a secret. The girl wondered why she only had such distrust for him. After a small amount of time, the girl went to the manor. There, the girl was waiting for the already set table, on which stood perfect different dishes for her. She sat and ate quietly, and also thought about the fact that now that her parents are very much paid for her, this is just a huge chance. At this time, the chef, whose name was Keel, came out to the girl. He was bringing more dishes to the table while humming some kind of tune to himself. The heroine immediately turned to him and stated that he was also their chef. So does he know what rice is? This man was precisely the head chef of the Duchy of Dreet, whose name was Keel. He wondered in amazement, and then remarked whether this rice was some kind of pastry. The heroine remarked to him that it was not at all the rice she thought it was. At the same time, you did not wonder if he did not know what rice is. The man immediately began to think about all this. After a short reflection, he asked with surprise if he had something similar in his practice. The girl became sad at this, she thought, if he really did not know it. Afterward, she thought that if she remembered, she had never eaten rice here either. While she was thinking about it, the man shouted that he remembered everything. The girl wondered if it was true, and he declared with joy on his face that it was exactly so. He then brought out a book labeled Clues for Goods and Sweet Appetizers and Desserts from Ancient Times. At this, he remarked that he had read about it all in this book. The heroine wondered what kind of book he had in his hands in the first place. The man went on to say that it tells about the snacks of ancient people. It turns out that this culture has died out over time, and asked if she was interested in it. He also said that it is great that she is interested in history. Such words of the chef surprised the girl very much and put her in a stupor. The girl wondered what kind of ancient rice it was, and then asked if he said that rice is the same culture as extinct, and it no longer exists. The interlocutor in turn noted that he had never seen this rice himself. In this, he inquired whether the girl was not glad that their wheat was not extinct yet. And when he said that, he immediately laughed very hard. The girl thought that these words sounded quite encouraging. Then she thought about her plans and wondered what she should do with her dream. After all, as long as she had her memories, she couldn't forget about the rice. At the moment when she thought about it, she imagined a huge rice field on which she was walking. Then the heroine jumped up and asked if the man had any other information about rice. The man heard this, he opened the book and began leafing through it. After a short time of flipping through it, he stated that there was one rather interesting passage in the book. In this passage, it was written that the demon beasts loved rice, and that was why all the rice was taken to Mount Gaji. After reading it, the man remarked that even though it would only tell the story, but then in common the demons would take their crops. The protagonist thought that, in any case, rice means that there was in this world after all. It turns out that if it was so, then not all is not yet lost. After all, the effect the girl could notice in this world is simply the perfect atmosphere for growing rice. She knew that there must be at least some way. At the same time, it turns out that she is still not going to give up to realize her dream. After a while, the heroine went to the beds to work again. Suddenly, he smiled happily and shrieked that she had succeeded in everything. She also joyfully announced that the beds were finally ready. Then she sat down over them and thought that now they will start to sprout, and soon they will bloom. And it turns out that eventually she will get fruit from them. While the protagonist was looking at her beds, the maid came up to her. She immediately turned to the girl, and the latter paid attention to her. The woman told her that the Duke and the Duchess had arrived. The girl wondered in surprise if they had already arrived. She also noticed that she should have been warned about all this earlier. The father and mother of the protagonist really arrived, and they had gifts for the girl in their hands. Immediately after she learned of their arrival, she ran to them to hug. Them in turn were happy to see their own daughter. The heroine thought that ever since she remembered her past life for some reason, she had been uncomfortable socializing with her own parents. Still, she had adapted fine now, and she just found it easier to communicate with them. Her father asked the girl what new things had happened in all these days. The girl remarked with a smile that she had gone to the magic tower in the staffs to check on all his older brother. Also thought that she wouldn't say anything about farming right now. The woman hearing those words was very much surprised, and further inquired about the girl. But he noted she was badly offended recently. The heroine immediately thought, what in common the real Erica did to them that they think like this? Further, she noticed that everything is not like that, and with her brother, she really gets along well. Her parents wondered what she was talking about. After that, she decided to tell her parents everything about Roel. She did all this because she knows him better than anyone else, and it just so happens that he just wanted to get parental love and understanding. And now the girl needs to bring him home before it's too late. Soon, she told the Duke and Duchess why Roel had gone to the magic tower. It was all precisely because of her stupidity and reality. She also told about the fact that her older brother was just trying to get along with her. At that very moment, it was obvious to the driver that they were listening to her story with a very large amount of annoyance. Her mom stated to Erica, looking at her now, that she had thought about it for a long time. She also added that perhaps it was partly their fault for not taking care of Roel properly. After all, as a family, they were supposed to be supporting him. After just a short period of time, the protagonist ate together with her parents. But in addition to the girl's parents at the table, sat already, and her older brother. The girl thought that again she had the same thin ice plate. After all, she did not think that everything would pass so quickly and immediately. At one point, the Duke coughed and asked his eldest son if he liked the food. The latter, in turn, simply said he liked it. The heroine, hearing such an answer, thought that as she expected a cold and precise answer from him. Before all this, the father told the heroine that he would invite the royal to dinner, and it turns out that the guy for the first time now dines with them together. The girl sat and ate while thinking that she will deal with everything later, and first it is necessary to enjoy the food. Suddenly, the father turned to his son and said that he had heard about Erica, that it was all a misunderstanding. After that, he added that he was wrong. Hearing this, the protagonist immediately picked up on it and told her father that it was her fault, but the man remarked to his daughter to just sit down. The Duchess also joined the conversation, telling her son that she too wanted to apologize to him. In doing so, she added that she was very sorry because of the whole situation that happened. The boy, who was sitting across from his parents, was shocked that they apologized to him, and also at the fact that she was the one his little sister had told all of this to. The protagonist knew that her older brother was born in the slums. That's how he wandered the dirty streets. But that was all until the Duke and the Duchess appeared before him. That was when Roel first felt that warmth of parental love for him. He later left the magic tower thinking he was just thrown away. And it was because of all this that he came to hate Dreith's family. Suddenly, the guy declared to his parents that they shouldn't apologize because it was all his fault. Mom immediately asked if the guy didn't want to come home. He, in turn, noticed that the magic tower is the very local, where he wanted to go from the very beginning. And it was because of that, he wasn't going to go home for now, because he had unfinished business. Still, he thanked his parents for inviting him home and apologized to him. His mom heard those words, was quite relieved. The protagonist remembered that all this is really true, and it turns out that her older brother had always dreamed of a magic tower. The girl wondered if he wanted to become an archmage. Boris said that if he was able to use magic and the highest level, he could pass the exam for the title of archmage. The girl continued to eat and thought that all of this was indeed true. After all, as she remembered, after this novel and her brother really will become a great magician in the future. And all this is because it is a great chance for him to become an archmage. He has to go through a lot. It turns out that he has spent several years studying the most complex magic and also researched new magic. After all, his goal was to pass the Archmage exam. In fact, his story begins a little later than the original plot. All this happened because to go all the way to the Archmage took a very long time. Even after going through all this thorny path, Royal wished to become a great mage. Even after becoming what he wanted, he still wished to raise the reputation of his Dreith family. All of this was only because he thought he owed them all a great deal. The Duke stated to the lad that it was all good. If he wanted to become an Archmage, then they would support him in everything. Also, too, that he does not know whether it is good or bad, but he should not worry because they will always be on his side. Also asked how about seeing his family more often. The heroine thought that Roel Drita is definitely part of the Drieta family, and just as well, she was well aware that he knew it himself. The boy heard his father's words, stated that of course he would do so. At that, he averted his eyes and seemed even a little embarrassed. The protagonist looked at him and it seemed to her that he was feeling better. The Duke asked the guy if his magical training was going well. The guy remarked to him that he was working hard, but it was still not enough at all. The girl thought, how could it not be enough? After all, she remembered from the plot of the novel that even the Crown Prince, who took the place of the Master of the Sword, will not be able to defeat Roel. The girlfriend smiled and declared that her brother was so smart. While noting that Mom and Dad are very proud of him, she also noticed that in addition, her brother was so young and could already use very strong magic. The older brother heard such words and was absolutely shocked. At the same time, the parents themselves were shocked to hear the words of their daughter. Mom immediately asked if what the girl said was really true, and the father noted that when it comes to the strongest magic, not even all experienced magicians can do that. Also inquired if he was correct in saying that. The man remarked that it was fine at such a young age. The boy, because of this, noticed that his magic is not stable yet, and something in it still needs to be fixed. But his father wondered if it wasn't already an accomplishment. Still, everything was as expected of his son. The protagonist watched their conversation happily. While looking at the guy, thought to only have someone look at him, for he is quite embarrassed at the moment. At that, she thought that everything was fine and her mission had been quite successful. At that, thought that after all, her big brother is still a child. Suddenly, he looked at her with his cold gaze, and they crossed their gazes for a moment. The parents were contentedly joyful at this moment and smiled continuously, and the girl immediately turned around from the guy's cold stare. At that, I thought that she shouldn't be happy like this. After all, her older brother almost burned her with just one look. In any case, she had managed to melt Roel's cold heart. Now she was sure that she and Roel would get along well in the future. Just a short while later, the older brother was already leaving for the magic tower. Mom stated that Yugai was more careful and visited home more often. She is also very worried because the road isn't exactly safe right now. Father also remarked that as the guy brings, be sure to let him write a letter. After all, the number of demons has really increased a lot lately. The protagonist, upon hearing this, wondered if the number of demons had really increased. The Duke paternally put his hand on her head to calm her down. In that he laughed and stated that this was exactly the case, being that was the reason why Mom and Dad were just at the Imperial Palace. The Duchess stated that the trouble is in the mountains. His Majesty is greatly concerned about the sudden increase in demon attacks. The man remarked that such times the sword of the Empire must always be on guard. The father further stated to his son that as he had told him before, let him be careful. The boy, because of this, remarked that he understood and would do so. The protagonist thought, isn't it dangerous to send him off alone like that? After all, she knew that in this world there are many different times the so-called demon beasts. They are a strange race that cannot be described in words. It turns out that they are unusually strong and very agile. But the biggest problem is in the people themselves. After all, they are often attacked by demon beasts. It is because of this reason that the imperial family hired the Dreith family to protect the citizens. Also sent them to protect the borders. The family was ordered to protect the capital city from the attacks of beast demons. Although the demons were trouble, there were times when they became useful. The girl knew that the empire where she lived was near Mount Gaji, where the beast demons dwelled, and for that reason, the courageous Kukman Empire had yet to conquer the Wraith Empire. All of this only happened because of the demons that were in Mount Gaji. But remembering all this, the girl realized that the number of demons on the mountain had also greatly increased now. Father continued to say that the demon named Dragon, living on Mount Gaji, is the most dangerous now, but he is an unusual demon because they say he takes the grain, and it turns out that this grain will soon become an endangered crop. The girl heard that one and realized with joy, this is it. So it turns out that this demon named Dragon knows the secret of rice. At this time, my older brother said goodbye to his parents and declared that he would already pass. Before entering the carriage, he still threw a cold glance towards the protagonist. But the girl at this very time was distracted and thought that it was time for her to get on with it and learn more about this demon. After all these events, the protagonist began to train. He just like that was on a hill in his estate and declared herself that she will succeed. And yet the main thing for her now is to follow her dream, and then she jumped down. But the landing was a bad one for her and she hit the ground. Then she got up and there was a rather large abrasion on his head. As she did so, she thought to herself that she was still not getting used to this body of hers. So it turns out that she decided to climb the very mountain of Gaji. And because of this, it turns out that in order to reach it, she practiced hard. She practiced lifting a stone, jumping high and keeping her balance. The girl felt that, as expected, the blood of the Dreith family flowed in her. Most people from this family have incredible strength. Fortunately for the protagonist, Erica was a pure-blooded Dreada. After her unsuccessful jump down, the girl was heading to the side. Her whole body was in a lot of pain, and it thought her ankle was hurting after all. But still, she thought that there was no way she would give up on growing rice so easily. Immediately afterward, she rushed towards the forest. She thought that since she had taken the holy sword with her, she would definitely be safe. Literally, after a small amount of time, the girl stopped in the middle of the forest. She looked around and stated that the road was much wider than she thought. The girl remembered that behind the Duchy of Dreith was Mount Gaji, but she had learned the road from the butler. After a moment, the protagonist crouched in the bushes nearby and wondered if she could set up an ambush there, plus thought that she had climbed up that mountain quite easily. At this moment, she remembered that her body from her past life was perfectly prepared for physical activities. There wasn't a sport that she hadn't practiced. And also with all this, she had studied all the methods of growing different crops. But still with all this, she was very much bothered by this little body she had gotten. Suddenly, the girl looked up and saw something in front of her. There on the lawn was a small animal with big ears. The girl scrutinized it and thought that it was the dragon. A few moments later, the heroine noticed that the animal was running away from her. All this happened because he noticed the girl. She saw that he was running away in the other direction. Having followed his route, she realized that his den was there. After that, she headed towards the hole that was in the wall. Also, the heroine managed to sickness right a little bit into this hole. There, she saw countless supplies of different seeds and vegetables. But with all this, she never saw the cherished rice, which all this time she had dreamed of and for which she had come. But in spite of this, she was pretty much wondering where all of them came from. At the moment when the girl climbed out of the hole, the rabbit was following her. Suddenly, the girl saw him and greeted him. At the same time, because of his appearance, she thought that he was angry with the girl. Suddenly, there was a terrible howl from him. Immediately after that, he turned into a huge, ferocious animal, not a small rabbit. The protagonist thought, why did he suddenly become so big? She began to look at him closely and fixated on his neck. There, the girl saw a pendant in which there were grains. She thought, is it really grains, because it could mean that it is a rabbit dragon? Further, the heroine realized that she got caught up in the joke. At the same time, the huge animal had already attacked the girl, trying to kill her. But she was not a bit afraid of him and thought that despite everything, she will take from this animal the seeds of rice. As she did so, she pulled out her ball to attack him and defend herself in the process. A moment later, they both flew into a furious attack on each other. And it was evident from their faces that which one of them was not going to give up. After a while, the heroine stopped and thought that it wasn't as simple as she thought. This animal, to lose, is definitely not going to lose. At the same time, her ankle, which the girl had injured before her journey, was hurting very badly. At that, she realized that she couldn't move at all because of her ankle. After that, she began to think that it all turns out to be because she jumped too high then. Raising her head, the protagonist noticed that she was attacked by the same huge rabbit. At the same time, the girl was convinced that his paw was already too close to her and realized that she would not be able to dodge. Having resigned herself to her fate, she had already closed her eyes in anticipation of the attack. But literally, at that very moment, the heroine heard someone shouting behind the shield. By the day's eyes, the girl was shocked, because in front of her saw her older brother Roel. He had used his magic to protect the girl with a shield. After protecting his little sister, he used his attack, after which there was an explosion. It was with this action that he drove the huge animal away. The girl looked very surprised at all this, and wondered what her brother was doing here. At the same moment, the guy also turned to her. He asked with a cold look what the girl alone was doing here. Also inquired what the girl was just thinking about when she came here alone. At this very time, there was already a huge beast at his back that attacked again. The guy managed to see the attack at the last moment, but there was nothing he could do. And yet the attack of this animal reached its goal. The brother, along with his older sister, he flew aside from such an attack. After a few moments, the protagonist still came to herself, but in front of her she saw her brother lying there. She immediately turned to him. On that one just lay there and did not answer anything to the girl. The girl carefully examined the guy, realized that he has a very weak breath. She wondered if he had fainted. And while she was sitting and dealing with all this, she heard a huge beast approaching her. The girl turned around and saw that he was already literally near and preparing for further attack. The heroine looked at the monster, realized that she had been too arrogant before. After a moment, she took her sword in her hands and placed it in front of her. As she did so, she begged him to give her strength. The strength she needed was so that we could protect her older brother Roel. Just a moment later, the sky was lit up by a bright beam of light that came from the sword. The beam of this light was so bright that it even blinded the animal that wanted to attack the girl. The protagonist realized that she had finally succeeded. Suddenly, someone turned to her and declared that she was a fool. The girl wondered what the one was carrying. Suddenly, she looked at her sword in her hands, and it changed a lot. Just as he was addressing the girl, talking about her now, he wondered how on earth you could turn it into some kind of hoe. She looked at the sword, wondering what the hell else had happened. The spirit of the sword kept saying that it was not a hoe, for it was a holy sword. But the girl continued to be shocked and stated, "Is it really a hoe?" The spirit was shocked and declared that she should not ignore it. The girl thought with a smile on her face that no matter how one looked at this thing, it looked like an ordinary hoe. And to top it all off, it was just the right size for her hand. The girl patiently asked if this was a first-class hoe. She added that it was also talking, which was interesting. But the spirit of the sword remarked to her again that it was a holy sword. The heroine again remarked that she couldn't believe she was holding this hoe in her hands as well. The sword wondered if she thought that sounded like a compliment to him. The huge rabbit at this time was staring in amazement at what was happening in front of him. Sword continued to voice her displeasure. He inquired if the girl was aware of how badly the holy ball's pride had been hurt. The heroine answered him nothing and immediately caught the rabbit's gaze. After that, she realized that she had to deal with this animal first, and the rest would all come later. At this very moment, the protagonist remembered the words of her real mother. The woman told her to listen to her words carefully. After all, she does not need to see or feel, can visualize it all, just by closing her eyes. The girl visualized in her head that there were weeds in front of her, and it was these weeds that the girl needed to pull out. She decided that she needed to think about their roots and how to destroy them. After a moment, she opened her eyes and was already in a furious attack. As she did so, she remembered the Farmers' Rights Act and its chapter number 1. It was this chapter, according to the protagonist, which stated that it was necessary to hit the weeds. Just so, the girl with all her might with her weapon, in the form of a hoe, hit the huge animal. This fierce attack easily succeeded the girl, and she twisted the animal after that. After a few moments, She turned around to the side to see what had happened to that particular dragon. She looked a little frightened, for she was worried whether she had succeeded or not. But the girl saw that the huge monster was already lying unconscious near her. At the same time, she was very happy and thought that finally she overcame him and was able to do it. After that, the heroine saw the blood on herself and thought what it was all about. Next, she looked at her hoe and scrutinized it carefully. So she thought that she was not sure, but it means that the holy ball shared its great power with her after all. Afterward, she regained her senses a bit and thought that what had happened to that monster after all and needed to check it urgently. Immediately, she slowly started to crawl towards the body of the animal that was lying unconscious. When she crawled a little closer, she saw the pendant that was hanging around the monster's neck. She rejoiced and immediately grabbed it. While taking a closer look at it, thought that it was the exact rice, or rather rice seeds. With joyful tears in her eyes, she thought that she wasn't wrong after all. But still before this, she even thought that she would never find her most cherished rice again. At the same time, the girl realized that it was now under some strange spell. She lifted this pendant up and thought how she could still get the grain out of there. The heroine also thought why this demon wanted to seal the rice after all. After that, she looked up and then sharply lowered her head and thought that something made her dizzy. After a while, she even felt like she was about to faint. At the very moment when she felt sick, her older brother came running up to her. He ran up, immediately turned to the girl. The heroine saw him and thought that thank God her brother was fine. Further, she thought that Autumn wanted to be with the piano together, but could not bear it any longer. That being said, her condition was not at its best, but she still got up and rushed into her brother's arms. He, in turn, did not expect such a turn of events and was shocked. The girl immediately stated that she was so glad that her brother was in order. Therefore, the heroine continued to be in an embrace and thought that she was really glad that she was able to protect Roll. While doing so, she thought about what could have happened if they were both hurt here, but then decided that she wouldn't even think about it after all. After a small amount of time, the protagonist found herself in her bed. While still asleep, she suddenly heard someone addressing her by name. It was not one person, and there were quite a lot of them, and the girl thought that the room is very noisy. Immediately because of this, she opened her eyes and stood up. Then she shouted to all the people in the room to stop making noise, because she didn't even die. All this was because the room was really noisy, and it was disturbing the girl. At the moment when she woke up, she saw countless people in front of her. In her room were her parents, and also the gardener. The chef was also there along with the maid and the butler. All of them were very excited when the girl woke up. Looking at everyone, their girl wondered what was even going on there. Suddenly, her father turned to her and put his hand on her head. At the same time, he inquired about how Erica was feeling right now. The heroine remarked that she was fine, but also wondered what they were all doing in her room. Ai remarked that they were just all worried really badly about her. The gardener tearfully remarked that Ai thought the mistress was dying. The girl remembered that Erica Drita was the only daughter of the Drieta family. That was why all the people around her were overprotective of her. And all this was because she was the most desired child of them. That was enough to make Erica a villain. But even so, she realized that she was getting very tired of all the commotion around her. Someone present said that he would immediately descend to the depth of 100 meters ocean and get there the elixir of immortality. Someone said that I am all this is not that, because he will go and bring an healing horn centaur. The girl got very tired of all the yelling and declared that she had had enough. She added that she was fine after all. Everyone immediately fell silent and turned their attention to her. At that very moment, the Duchess began to kick everyone out of the room. While doing so, she told everyone that they needed to talk privately, mother and daughter, so she asked that they all leave them alone. The Duke was surprised to hear the woman ask if he needed to leave as well. The woman stated to Huizhen that he should do so as well and kicked him out of the room. After that, the two of them were left alone in the room, and the mother crouched down beside her daughter. Next to her, she stated with a smile that silence had finally come at last. Next, added to Erica that she wanted her to explain herself now. The protagonist thought that she was already scared by these words, but still, as expected, Mom's reaction was quite natural. Still, the heroine asked what she needed to explain. The woman with a slight smile and asked how and why she was there alone and unaccompanied. Still, what was she doing there? The heroine smiled oddly and stated that she understood what she was talking about. At that, thought that all she had to do was smile stupidly. She further noted that she had heard that a demon had appeared, and just because of that, she couldn't stay in one place. Her mom wondered if she couldn't sit still and why that was. The girl immediately ranted that it was all because she was just that, a member of Dreeth's family. From this it turns out that she also wants to fight monsters like her mom along with her dad. The woman was shocked at such words from her own daughter. The heroine immediately thought, "Aren't those words she said a great excuse?" Mom sadly exhaled and stated that she understood how the one was feeling right now. She added that she shouldn't do that anymore. She further added that she really understands what the woman is talking about right now, doesn't she? The heroine smiled because of this and stated that she understood everything. At that, she thought that luckily for her, she was blasted right now. The woman's friend saw her smile and immediately approached her. While doing so, she lightly slapped her head and asked what else it was. Still, her heart and her mom's heart nearly stopped with excitement for her own daughter. It was also added that she and Roel had suffered for her recklessness as well. The girl immediately remembered her older brother and what he had done before. Immediately, she inquired of her own mother where he was now. The older brother, for his part, was sitting in the magic tower. While doing so, he was pondering over the situation that had recently happened to him and his younger sister. When he returned home, his mother stated that he had saved his little sister from a demon. Also, his father declared that Roel was just good for saving his precious sister. At this, he even stroked even his son on the head, making him a little embarrassed. After that, the guy inquired if they had made them worry. The man remarked that everything was fine. After all, the important thing was that they came back safe and sound after everything. The mom also remarked to him that they hadn't noticed it before, but when they did, they didn't think that Erica would ever do that. She also added that they were very surprised to see them both like her. This woman talked about what she saw after the older brother dragged in his little sister on his shoulders home. Then they were very badly bruised and tired at that, and the girl was unconscious. The Duke remembered this, and then with a smile on his face told his eldest son that he had done a great job. But the latter, in his turn, remarked that it was not so, for he was too weak. Suddenly his mother came up to him and declared that Roel should raise his head rather. She also added that he is really good, so he shouldn't blame himself for anything. After all, they are the Dryeth family, and this kind of thing happens to them often. The Duke said with a smile that it was all true, and asked if it was not a common occurrence for them. They also added, after all, he is a member of Dreeth's family after all. It was this whole situation that the guy was sitting and contemplating in the magic tower. He was even a little embarrassed, remembering all the nice words his parents had said to him. The woman, upon hearing her daughter's question, stated that Roel had returned to the magic tower. In doing so, he had received some minor abrasions, so noticing that the girl wasn't worried about him. Hearing this, the protagonist immediately jumped out of bed and declared that she urgently needed to get to the magic tower. Where she was about to leave, the woman stopped her. At the same time, she immediately pointed out that although the members of the Dreeth family had greater physical strength than the average person, there were many other dangers to their family. She wondered if the girl understood all of this. The heroine paid attention and inquired as to what she was saying. The woman informed that it all has to do with their high status. When danger comes, they attack instead of running away. It turns out that this is all embedded in their regions a long time ago. She went on to sadly state that this was why she didn't want the girl to grow up like the real members of the Dreeth family. After all, it turns out that despite everything, she needs to run away and survive, not fight like everyone else. The woman then smiled and wondered if the girl realized that she was still a child. Also remarked that it's normal for everyone to want to run away like mom at some point. added that this is why she is not allowed to go out of the window at night. The heroine was shocked and thought it was a complete rip. Moments later, the woman turned to the girl again and stated that they had found this demon, just as she was holding the same rabbit that the protagonist had fought. The mother wondered if this was the creature that had attacked her. The heroine wondered if the rabbit was really that demon. She further realized that it was definitely him, only then he was much bigger. The woman added that they caught it and decided not to kill it until they showed it to her. She also remarked that this was the first kill, so they needed to follow through first. The protagonist was shocked at such words and thought, would she really have to kill him? That being said, she was scrutinized by the creature her mom was holding. I thought that despite everything he was doing, he was pretty cute. And indeed, the creature looked quite cute. Suddenly, the heroine remembered that times were really hard right now. Also, her mom used to be just a ruthless knight. Thinking a bit about everything, the heroine looked at the rabbit again and immediately realized that she just can't kill it because it looks pretty pitiful to her. After that, a small amount of time passed and the rabbit became in the girl's room. She stood carefully, looking at him, and wondered what she should do with him. The rabbit in turn just sat quietly on the floor. Suddenly, someone knocked on the girl's room and then entered. It was a girl, and she asked Miss if she was feeling well. This girl was the maid of the Dreet family, and her name was Betty. Suddenly, she noticed a cute creature that was lying on the floor. Immediately, she turned to the girl and asked when she had such a cute rabbit. At this very time, the protagonist remembered something from what she had heard. It turns out that in the past, the people and families of Dreet had been pretty heavily talented. Now she was looking at Betty, who was playing with the rabbit. Because of the similar situation she saw, then she was almost certain that Betty was not her. Sadly, the girl noticed that the creature's fur was all tattered. At that, she wondered who could have committed such a cruel act towards it. The heroine immediately thought that this person, in which she said, "As it is exactly," and she. Next, Betty continued to look at him sweetly and said that once his hair grows back, he will be even cuter. The heroine heard this and thought, of course he will be cute. Then she looked at the rabbit again and thought that he is really quite a dangerous animal. So it turns out he attracts innocent people with his looks, and because of that he gets their sympathy and favor with him. At the same time, the girl knew that he was watching her very closely. She also thought that maybe she should kill him, as her mother had told her recently. It turns out that the reason why one should eliminate them is because of their danger. But then the girl wondered, if after all he is not a threat, then it turns out everything is fine or not. Also stated to herself that she should think about it. The heroine remembered that her real father in a previous life was very fond of animals. She remembered one of the days when she told her father that the animal was not obeying her at all, but he told her that not all animals are obedient after all. At the same time, he added that it was a common theory after all. The girl raised that during training the animal should understand that now it will receive punishment. At the same time, approached her new animal and thought that they will learn discipline together. She also recalls her father, decided that she would train the creature. The heroine thought that at the same time they should already start, and they will start with punishment. And because of all this, she will instill discipline because her father in a past life said so. So she thought about the demon rabbit. It turns out he is a demonic beast, but she wondered if they were all the same. She thought that the best thing she could do right now was to teach him not to eat humans. At that, she thought about how she should do it after all. Immediately, she turned to Betty and inquired why she had come to her after all. The maid immediately came to her senses and said that she had already forgotten. At the same time, she took out of her pocket the very thing that the rabbit was wearing around her neck, and holding it out to the girl declared that she should take it. The heroine took it and smiled, and declared that it was her rice, and added that she had forgotten about it with everyone else, and thanked Betty. The maid smiled and stated that she was not to be thanked. She also remarked how expensive this thing is to eat after all. She further remarked that as soon as the gentleman saw it, he was going to burn it immediately. The heroine wondered in amazement what on earth she was saying. Here was wondering why on earth he would decide to burn it like that. After all, This is the same grain of rice for which she risked her life. Now she wondered why Roel had reacted the way he had. She wondered if the demon had possessed him and did not approve of the grain in human hands. Also, the girl realized that she would need magic to get those seeds out of there. Immediately, she thought of her older brother. At that, she wondered if he would fulfill her request if it appealed to him. After a while, the girl lay in her bed and considered her hoe. In this, she thought that only one could think of it, and that means that this hoe is the Holy Sword. She also knew that originally its owner should be the main character of this novel she had gotten herself into. After all, this weapon is the Garcian Holy Sword. Dreet's family was trying to prevent Erica's execution, and it turns out this sword was a family heirloom given to Dreet by the imperial family. Pandora, who infiltrated the palace dressed as a knight, happened to see the Garcian sword. Because of this, it turned out that the Holy Ball chose Pandora as its mistress. As a consequence, Erica was angry at the family's sacred relics. Still, because it chose Pandora, not her, as its mistress there. Holding strongly with hatred, she then decided to kill Pandora. She didn't know then that it would lead to her own demise. The girlfriend stood up and thought that she had already changed the original plot after all. It happened because she had already booked it. Now thought perhaps she should go to the field, but suddenly thought that it was better not to do that, because she had something very bad headache. While she was sitting and thinking about all this, someone approached her. It was the spirit of the sword, which stated that the girl turned her back. But the heroine did not understand and thought where this voice came from. But the spirit turned to her again and stated that it was here. The girl was shocked again and immediately looked at her sword. He again continued to say that he had spoken to her before. The girl wondered in amazement if he could definitely talk. The interlocutor said that he was the Holy Sword of Garcian. It turns out that he has awakened and the girl still does not realize it. He added that he has so many emotions right now that he can't even talk to her normally. The girl wondered what he was talking about right now. The sword spirit wondered what the girl wanted after all. Is it the salvation of this world? Or is it killing demonic monsters and guiding people to the right path? Also possibly exterminate those who threaten her in doing so. Next, he noticed the girl to just respond to that. The girl was shocked once again and thought about her wish. At this, she stated that if she was to speak of her wish, she would somehow need to be more precise. Immediately, she jumped off the bed and stated that it was easier to plow a field with a hoe after all than with a sword. Garcian wondered what she had just said and asked her to wait. Next, she headed outside and stated that today would be a good time for them to go out and work. Sword inquired as to what she was saying. The girl also asked him if he would be okay afterwards. The one immediately remarked that of course he wouldn't. The heroine cried out for the one to finally stop it. After all, he himself had asked to say her wish. The interlocutor immediately stated that it was not the right wish after all. The girl remarked that if you want to plant seeds, you have to plow the ground properly. The spirit remarked that all this is not true because he is really a real holy sword. She wondered if he just didn't like the shape of the hoe. She went on to say, perhaps she should make it into a shovel then. Suddenly, the sword flew out of her hands and hung in the air. At that, one wondered if this girl even knew anything at all, either about the pride of the holy sword. After all, what field he is a holy sword after all? The girl was shocked by this and wondered if the one could fly, which was very interesting. Notice that he is indeed a perfect hoe. He went on to say that he is a Garcian great holy sword, and in doing so, he can do anything. At the same time stated, if the girl was wondering why, it was because he was blessed by God himself. But the heroine did not listen to him and immediately jumped, grabbed him. Immediately the interlocutor stated that he could manage on his own quite well. The girl wondered what he had said. Immediately she took her fist in her hand and hit the table that stood next to it, shattering it to pieces. She further inquired with a smile, wondering if Tutu thought she was still a small child. While pointing at the shattered table, she remarked if he could see that she knew how to control her power. Sword was shocked at this turn of events, and the girl stated that the one repeated again everything he said before. Frightened, He stated to the mistress that they needed to resolve all of this peacefully after all. At the same time, he remarked that everything would be fine, and if she needed to plow the field, he would fulfill everything for his mistress. The girl declared that this was all true, and so it was. At this time, her rabbit looked at the girl and tried to sneak out of the room. The heroine noticed this and stated to her pet where he was going after all. She also added it turns out she didn't let him leave. At the same time, she added that she needed to plow the field. Next, she swung the ball at the animal, and the animal was very frightened. It was doubled that there is an old saying not to put off for tomorrow what can be done today. That was why she wondered if they needed to start their punishment. Next, she aimed her sword at the rabbit, and the rabbit was even more frightened. After a proper education with carrot and stick, the taming of the demonic beast went smoothly. The heroine was just about to hold out food to her new beast and wondered what about it. The girl also named her new rabbit Raccoon. The critter immediately took the meat she held out to him. The girl remarked that it was all right, because it was edible, and the chicken tasted pretty much the same. The heroine thought that the appetite of Raccoon's pet was subdued by the chicken. It turns out that aggression towards people was the most problematic part of his upbringing. After all, when the main character someone left the room, the pet immediately attacked them. But the girl immediately at these moments again punished him. And it turns out after he received a few times on the head, he immediately calmed down. Next, the protagonist together with her animal went to the field. Looking at him, the girl thought, whether he has now become calmer after all. Sometimes he does some tricks, but it's not enough. Next, they harvested all the crops, and the girl used Raccoon as her assistant. And when they did, the girl turned to him and showed him the seed. At the same time, she noticed that henceforth he would be in charge of sowing the seed, and wondered if he understood that. Still, more time was needed to teach him everything. Eventually, Raccoon became a worthy assistant to the farmer. The girl looked at her animal and thought that the seeds were now easily planted. Suddenly, the heroine approached the gardener and addressed her. As he did so, he inquired if they were really growing crops. The heroine remarked that they were, for it was much more useful than she had previously thought. The man, looking at the pet, declared in the state the animals were naturally ferocious. It was from this that he did not think that they would ever help people. It turns out that no one has ever managed to tame a demonic beast yet. Next, he noticed that her beast was rather calm for a young lady. But suddenly they saw that he was starting to become aggressive towards them. Immediately, the protagonist realized what she had to do and immediately ran up to him. Taking her weapon, in the form of a hoe, she hit him on the head. While doing so, she shrieked to the beast that she didn't need to show everyone her teeth. The gardener remarked that it was a demonic beast that could not get away from a human. At the same time, stated to the girl that she turns out to be a special person. The heroine inquired what it was that he was talking about now. The man remarked that perhaps he should move the tools for the demonic beast. After all, it turns out he wouldn't be able to suppress its power in any way. The heroine wondered if something like that really exists. She also added that if it did, then he could bring those tools. Next, she was heading somewhere, and the interlocutor inquired where she was going. The girl remarked that she had to go to the magic tower, and she would come right back. The protagonist knew that farming was going smoothly, but there was still one problem. After all, after recovering from the acute period, the girl had never once seen her older brother Roel. She tried to contact him in some way through letters, sent a lot of messages, but there was never a response from her brother. That's when the heroine thought maybe something had happened to him. Since then, a week has passed, and still no response. It turns out that she had no choice but to go to the magic tower herself, and it turns out that at this very time, the heroine was heading there in a carriage. Girlfriend, I had a pretty sad, and she thought she needed to apologize to her older brother. She also needed to talk about sealing magic with him. When the girl arrived at the magic tower, they apologized to her and said that it was very difficult to contact him now. But the heroine noticed that it would only take a minute and no more. But the interlocutor noted to her that he tried to call his number, but still there was no answer from him. This person was a mage from the tower whose name was Leah.